Hello and welcome. This is Mouse Gunner, and we're back with some more Automation, the car company tycoon game. Continuing on with the campaign roleplay of the Edison Car Company in 2002. And the model we're going to be looking at is the Nebula, which is the SUV in the Edison Car Company's lineup. Now, this model is going to have some similarities with the Asteroid because it's built off of the same body. Now, it's a different type or a modification of that body. But starting off, one of the big differences is in the chassis. So rather than a ladder chassis, we have a monocoque chassis. It is made out of AHS steel, just as the Asteroid was. We have a front longitudinal mount. This has a McPherson strut in the front and semi-trailing arm, which is another difference with the Asteroid, which used a solid axle leaf type of suspension in the rear. And we have corrosion-resistant steel for the panel material. As far as styling goes, again, keeping things simple. That is more or less the styling. All right, so for the engine, we have a longitudinal rear-wheel drive for the base trim here. And the engine is going to be the exact same engine we had in the Asteroid. So I'm not going to go over all the setup. If you need to see that, you can go ahead and check out the Asteroid video. But a reminder of the performance we get is 227 horsepower and 208 foot-pounds of torque. So jumping into the actual trim selection here, starting with the gearbox, we have a 4-speed automatic. And the way I set up the gearbox, there isn't really much of an economy gear. These are mostly used for acceleration, so we're not really going beyond the estimated top speed. So the end result of that is we get a 0 to 62 time of 8.2 seconds and 17.1 miles per gallon. We have a little bit of wheel spin with 6.2%. And I do have a viscous LSD on this vehicle, which is going to help quite a bit with the wheel spin. As far as the tire setup, we have medium compound road rather than the hard long life road that we have on the Asteroid. And some of the things we lose out because of that is, for instance, we don't gain as much in off-road ability, but we do gain quite a bit on more on-road driving. And I consider this SUV to be more of an on-road driver. I know it is partly supposed to be an off-road vehicle, but let's be honest with ourselves. Most of the people that buy these type of vehicles are really not taking them off-road much. All right, as far as the tire setup, I have 225s in the front and 245s in the rear, and I have 17-inch rims that are steel rims. For the brakes, I have solid disc 2-piston up front and solid disc 1-piston in the rear, both with as large a brake size as I could get with the rims that I have. Now, this model and all of the models for this year period were designed before I was made aware of something by the devs that is a change in the way the game works from the last time I played. And this has to do with a comment I made earlier where in some instances it appeared, and I think this is a case of that, by switching to drum brakes, I actually get better performance in some regards, for instance drivability, than I do with the solid disc. And I was really puzzled by this. And the reason is because they've added in an element where this graph here means a lot more. So this shows you here, this is the braking force that you're getting, and then this is more or less what the rear tires are asking for as far as braking performance. So you can see my rear brakes are overperforming what the rear tires need to stop them. As a result, I'm getting a penalty for over braking. And this is tied into the actual brake size. By me having as big a brakes as I can fit in the rear, I'm actually making my overall performance worse. So as you can see, as I reduce the brake size, I'm getting a better performance in a lot of regards. And this is because of that over braking penalty. But as you do this, you're also increasing the brake fade. What they've done is rather than just have the brake size just be the rotor size, which is actually what you see modeled in as well. So as I change, and this is not going to be all that easy to see with what rims I have, but as I reduce here, you see the rotor size goes down. Now, previously in the game, this size, that's what it was. It was the rotor size. But now they are wrapping up a bunch of different elements of the braking performance into this one slider. And as a result, I'm getting way over braking here. Now, I think the graph, the way the graph has been represented hasn't really changed. But what has changed is now they're penalizing you for overbraking. They also penalize you for underbraking. So if the front tires here, if my bar was below what the tires were asking for as far as braking, I would have a pretty massive penalty. Now, one thing you can overcome this penalty for the overbraking, which is more or less the result of that, is that it's going to lock up your wheels, is you can add on ABS, and this is going to limit a lot of the penalty. Now, in real life, you wouldn't really want that to work that way. As you can see, the difference between the score with the ABS and not. And I think a lot of the reason why it's such a big difference. Now, the ABS system would be giving me quite a bit of a boost anyway. But I think the reason why it's such a big boost is because it's combating this lockup here. Now, again, in real life, you wouldn't really want that to be the case. If ABS was firing all the time, it would actually make the driver of the vehicle kind of worried, because if you've ever had, an ABS system go off when you are driving, it's kind of a startling experience, because the brake pedal will kind of pulsate, and if you don't really know a lot about cars, when it does that, you'll be like, oh, what's going on? Something's wrong with my vehicle. So it's not really something you want to be having a lot, but in one way, you can overcome this deficiency. Now, if I was going to make this a more efficient design, I would indeed tune my brake size to all of my vehicles. But I will point out, because they've wrapped up so many things and just to this one slider, you're going to have quite a bit more brake fade than we've had in the past in doing that. And there's going to kind of be a point where you reach, a plateau where you're not really getting any better performance, because you're starting to have more and more brake fade, as you can see here. But you're still over braking, so you're getting a penalty. And this is why I think this change is rather problematic. And I could go into a lot of detail of how I feel exactly about this change to the brakes, and maybe a better way of doing it, or why I just don't really like the idea here. But that could probably be a video unto itself, and I don't want to drag that out too much. But at the moment, I'm not too pleased with that change, and I'm not going to change in the designs that I've done already for 2002, because that would require me going through all these trims and changing up the brakes for each and every one of them. And I'd also have to change a lot of other things, because it changed other dynamics. For instance, by changing the rotor size, I'd also change weight, and I'd also change the weight dynamics, because as I'm reducing the size of the brakes here, I'm reducing weight, but I'm reducing weight specifically in the rear. So as a result, I'm going to have more wheel spin, because I have less traction, because I have less weight on the wheels, and so on and so forth. And because that would change so many things, and I'd have to modify so many things, and I've already more or less designed these models, I'm just going to keep them as they are for 2002. But maybe in the future, that is something I will work on, tuning the brake performance to each individual trim. In any case, let's go ahead and jump into the aerodynamics here. So I have a fully clad under tray, and the cooling airflow is coming in roughly about 20 above the required, which is more or less the same thing I did with the Asteroid. Typically, I only do about 10 above, but with the Asteroid and this model, the Nebula, I go a little bit more than that, just to make it a little bit more robust. As far as the interior setup, I have 7 seats, standard interior, standard entertainment, power steering, and ABS as standard, with standard safety. For the suspension, I have standard springs, gas-mounted tube dampers, and passive sway bars. This is my suspension setup. And moving on to the test track, so we can see a little bit more about the vehicle. I have a top speed of 130.9 miles an hour. We come in under 3,500 pounds, so 3,400 pounds, a little bit more than that. Weight distribution, pretty darn even, almost 50-50. That's nice to see. And we already saw the 0 to 62 time, so let's get an actual track time here. And I expect this to be, respectable, and it is 1 minute 35.57. All right, so let's jump into the next trim, which is going to be an all-wheel drive version of our V6 powered vehicle. So just to show that I do indeed have all-wheel drive, we come over here. We see it's now longitudinal all-wheel drive. And the body type that I choose for the Nebula SUV is this one. So, for instance, the Asteroid was this, and the Nebula is this. Okay, so let's jump into the actual trim setup here, starting with the gearbox setup. So, again, 4-speed automatic. Again, we're using those 4 gears for acceleration. Now, I more than likely made the setup a little bit more aggressive. Now, we don't have any wheel spin at all, and that is because of the all-wheel drive system. So I have a power distribution of 30 to the front and 70 to the rear. And again, I still have that viscous LSD. So this is what is responsible for getting rid of that wheel spin, as we have more traction because all 4 wheels are driving the vehicle now. As far as the tire setup, nothing really has changed here. Brake setup, again, nothing has changed here. And this is where we're seeing a little bit more brake fade. And that is due to the increase in weight due to the all-wheel drive system, which we see here. And this is where I'd have to, again, balance the brake size. And more than likely, the brake size, if I were to actually try and get it to its optimum, would be completely different between this trim and the other V6 trim, which is one of the reasons I don't really necessarily agree with this change, because, yeah, you might have some changes in brakes from one trim to another, but they wouldn't be like that much of a variance, in my opinion. And there's other things besides, and again, I'm not going to get into too much detail with that. But aerodynamics-wise, nothing really has changed. Interior, nothing really has changed. As far as suspension, there's going to be some slight differences. One that I noticed right off the bat is the damper stiffness due to an increase in weight and just changing some things as a result of that. Let's go ahead and jump into the test track. So we lose a little bit in top speed. 128.3 is now our top speed. We already discussed the weight has increased. Our weight distribution has gone a little bit more front heavy. And we do have a little bit slower 0 to 62 time, so I can expect a slower overall time. And we've seen that a lot with our all-wheel drive vehicles as well. But when you consider that pretty much everything about this vehicle has gotten a little bit worse, it's not too surprising to see a worse time. So we have more than 1.2 seconds difference. Well, not quite 1.2 seconds difference, but very close to that. And let's now jump into our next trim, which is the V8 powered Nebula. Now, this trim is going to be all-wheel drive. All of the V8 powered ones are going to be all-wheel drive. Oh, and I should show the engine here. So the performance we get out of the engine is 303 horsepower and 292 foot-pounds of torque. All right, so let's jump back into the trim. So with the gearbox setup, again, we have a 4-speed automatic. And again, it's set up with roughly the same kind of idea, although the spacing and the actual top speed are going to be different. They are more or less set with the same idea, so a little bit beyond that estimated top speed, but not far beyond that. And we end up with a 0 to 62 time of 7 seconds, so definitely quicker there. And our fuel economy has gone down to 15.8 miles per gallon. Again, the power distribution is the same, 30 up front, 70 in the rear, and we still have a viscous LSD. The tire setup is pretty much the same. Brake setup is the same as well, and we are seeing more brake fade. But we probably have a little bit less overbraking, as the rear brakes may be requiring a little bit more force, but we're still definitely having overbraking for sure. Aerodynamics are going to be different because this is a different engine, and it is, again, roughly 20 above. The interior, though, is still the same, as this is still the standard trim, just with the V8. Now, the suspension is probably going to be slightly different again because of weight differences. Let's look at the test track. So our top speed has gone up to 139.8 miles per hour. And the weight distribution has continued to go front heavy, and that makes perfect sense. We have a bigger, heavier engine up front, so there you go. And it looks like our cornering G's have gone down. So we're not cornering quite as well, but we're definitely accelerating faster and we have a higher top speed. So I would expect this to overall give us a better time. And that is indeed the case. So we have 1 minute 33.61. All right, so the last trim we have is the V8 with a premium interior. So again, gearbox setup is going to be roughly the same. There's going to be some slight differences as I try and combat the difference of acceleration between the two V8 trims. This is going to add still more weight on because of the premium interior. So I tried to combat that a little bit with a little bit variance in the gearbox setup. Tires are the same. Brakes are the same. The aerodynamics are the same as the other V8. But the interior is going to be where we see all our difference. So we have premium interior, premium CD, and I add on traction control and electronic stability control, which is something I've been doing with all of my premium trims. Suspension is going to be slightly different because we have more weight that we have to contend with. And overall, we have top speed of 139.6 miles an hour. Weight distribution is not quite as front heavy as we have more overall weight being distributed more evenly. And it looks like we're losing still more cornering G's as we're adding on that weight. We're getting 3,900 pounds there. So I expect this to be slower than the other V8. And that is indeed the case. So we lost roughly half a second, a little bit more than that. So now that we've looked at the different trims, let's look at the project setup. So I did this more or less the same way I've done all the other models thus far. And as far as the focus went, I just went with the 50 focus because I didn't want the most efficient production, nor did I want this to be something that we really focused on for learning, just kind of in the middle. And the same is the case for the engine. As far as the factory setup, I have a large factory that is producing a little over 850 cars, 864 cars a day. As far as the setup, I have 80 automation, which is the standard for this year period. And I'm producing as many as these of these vehicles as I can. Considering that this is still the era where SUVs are popular, it is definitely a good idea to produce as many as we can. As far as distribution goes, I figured that the V6 with the all-wheel drive would be the most popular. It's a balance of affordability and practicality, so I put it at that level. Next, I have just the standard V6, and then we go to the V8, and then the premium V8, pretty much that order. As far as the engines go, I more or less matched the production of the engines. And again, we're seeing that Constellation version being here, even though there shouldn't be any of these trims that use it, unless I made a mistake again, which I'm certain I didn't. But maybe I did. If you were paying attention as I was going through the trims, if there was one that I accidentally selected as the CNA6, which would have been the Constellation variant, then that is definitely a mistake. But in any case, we're producing just as many engines as we need for the V6, and the same is true for the V8, so we have a large factory. And we're producing only as many V8s as we need, so I am modifying the shifts to correspond with that. And we see that we need a little bit more V6s than we need for V8, so I do need to have more shifts working on that, or more or less more staff working on it than I do with the V8. Now, as far as the market segments, we're starting with the premium trim here because that was what I had selected ahead of time, and it does look like I do have the asteroid variant, so I'll just maybe keep an eye on that as we go through. But the three market segments we're doing the best at are utility sport, which is definitely the market segment we're trying to do the best in, city premium, and muscle. Again, we always do well in the pony or muscle segment, regardless of what we build. And the two that we're really looking for with this model is the two utility sport segments, and we're doing well in both of those. Utility sport we're doing the best in, but we're doing even still pretty well in the Utility Sport Premium, which technically this is the one that should be doing the best in that market segment. Now, City Premium is not really something we're going for, and honestly, this doesn't really fit that very well. It says a premium compact, little city car, more or less, and we're not anywhere near being compact, but we do pretty well in that segment for one reason or another. All right, so let's jump back into the base trim here. I do have a 5% markup, or at least should, with all of these trims. So again, we're using the asteroid variant. So as I said, I'm not really sure why the Constellation variant is popping up. Maybe that does that every time you have two variants of an engine. Not something I really paid close attention to. But now we're doing well in the Utility Sport, but not so well in Utility Sport Premium. As we can see here, it's not even being highlighted. We're still doing well in City Premium. Still the segment we're doing the best in, as a matter of fact, and we're doing pretty well in Family Sport. And doing pretty close as far as performance-wise in both the pony and muscle car segment. As I said, we either do well in one or the other, or I guess in this case, both. And the price we come up with is just a little under $18,000 with that 5% markup. For the all-wheel drive, I can expect the price to go up. And also for the game to crash. So I'll be right back. All right, we're back. The game crashed. And it seems like it does that every once in a while. This is the second time it's happened on while I'm recording, too. Switching in between the different trims and checking out the market data. In any case, the three segments we do well in is Utility Sport, City Premium, and Family Sport, which I think are the same segments we were doing well in with the other V6. And it looks like we've increased the performance of the muscle car segment and actually decreased the performance of the pony car segment. Some of that could have been the difference in affordability as we've jumped up in price here. And finally, we have the standard V8, which is doing well in Utility Sport, City Premium, and the muscle car segment, which I think is roughly the same as the V8 Premium was doing. All right, so let's look at the market data. Let's go ahead and compare our different models here. So the one I'm going to compare is the Asteroid here. And I might as well open the Constellation too so we can get some comparison. So one thing that the Nebula does quite well is drivability. Now, our worst is matching the worst of the Constellation, which was our previous high performer. And our best is actually exceeding the best performer of the Constellation. But we have a couple that are kind of more or less matching some of the areas of performance with the Constellation as well. For instance, but we're doing this with standard, though. Standard trims, whereas this is having to do premium to achieve those results. So both the standard trims of the Constellation are at 52, and we're able to achieve the 56 with a non-premium trim. Now, this is one with all-wheel drive, though, so keep that in mind. Now, as far as the Asteroid goes, we're obviously outperforming in drivability, sportiness, comfort. We're not doing quite as well, and that's actually surprising. I mean, we're doing well in some areas, but not in others. For instance, our standard trims are not doing as well as the standard trims for the Asteroid, which is interesting to see. Our premium trim, though, is doing better than the premium trim for the Asteroid, but that's one of the worst performers, though, outside of these two for the Asteroid, which is, a little bit weird, but okay. As far as prestige goes, I would say, it's kind of close to what we got with the Asteroid. Up and down here and there. I would say not quite as good as the Constellation, but that makes sense. As far as safety goes, it's in between the two. Not as safe as Constellation, but definitely quite a lot safer than the Asteroid, which is one of our least safe vehicles, I think. Let's just jump into one that should not get that good of a safety score like this. Yeah, see, even the Luna does better than the Asteroid. Let's just see one of our last ones, which is the Star, if I can find it. There, no, that's 96. Oh, there it is. There we go. Yeah, so so the Star and the Luna do better than the Asteroid. So the Asteroid is the worst performer there. As far as practicality goes, this has 7 seats. This can carry the most people. So it is the best performer in Practicality, which is great. That's exactly what we want from the Nebula. As far as off-roadability, it goes in between the two models, the Constellation and the Asteroid here. So it's not quite as good as the Asteroid, not any even close, but it's definitely better than the Constellation, which is our next best performer. As far as utility goes, again, it's better than the Constellation, but nowhere near with the performance of the Asteroid. But the Asteroid, these are the two categories that it needs to perform well in. This is the two categories we designed it around. So definitely good to see that the Asteroid's doing as we designed. As far as reliability, again, it's going in between the two metals. It's not quite as reliable as the Asteroid, but it's definitely more reliable than the Constellation, at least for the most part. We do have it matching some of the reliability of some of the trims, but it's better than the worst, let's put it that way. And it exceeds the best. As far as fuel economy, again, it falls in between the two. So it does slightly better than the Asteroid, but not quite as good as Constellation. Weight, it falls, I would say, on the lower side for the most part. There is one trim of the Asteroid that is lighter, but for the most part, it looks like the Nebula is slightly lighter than the Asteroid and lighter than the Constellation, which is one of the heaviest vehicles we have. As far as emissions, again, it falls in between the two. Not quite as good as the Constellation, but better than the Asteroid. As far as production units, it looks like, again, it falls in between the two. It's a little bit higher than the Asteroid, but not quite as high as Constellation. And it looks like cost falls in that same dynamic. So more or less, the Nebula is a model that falls really neatly in between the Constellation and the Asteroid, which I think is actually a good indicator that we designed it well. In any case, I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. This is Mouse Gunner, signing out.